For roughly 24 hours, the Indiana Fever fan base operated in a state of sustained anxiety. Across social media platforms, supporters tracked the movement of every franchise in the league as free agency announcements accumulated, while the Fever front office produced nothing. The silence was conspicuous. Fans had identified a specific name they expected to see attached to a new contract and instead received an Instagram post from Sophie Cunningham that offered no clear signal about her intentions. The post referenced betting on herself. In the context of professional sports free agency, that kind of language typically signals a departure. Within a few hours, the assumption had taken hold across forums and comment sections that Cunningham was leaving Indiana. The online reaction was swift. The pairing of Cunningham and Caitlin Clark, informally known among fans as the Trace Leaches era, was being discussed in the past tense before it had reached the end of its second season. A single line on a social media story had been enough to trigger a full reassessment of the roster's future. That reaction, however widespread, turned out to be premature. The silence from the Fever front office was not disorganization. It was the byproduct of an active pursuit. General manager Amber Cox was engaged in negotiations with multiple frontcourt targets at the same time, and Sophie Cunningham was already a known quantity, a player the organization had already assessed and valued. The more pressing question was whether they could add a second interior presence to complement Aaliyah Boston. The names Alana Smith and Azura Stevens were circulating internally as candidates. The front office wanted to strengthen the painted area and was prepared to let the process run its course before making any public announcements. That approach carried real risk. If the frontcourt negotiations fell through and the Cunningham delay had cost them her, the team would have ended free agency in a weaker position than where they started. But the Fever believed the market would move in a predictable direction and that Cunningham would remain available while they pursued a larger target. What the organization did not anticipate was how aggressively the market would escalate. Alana Smith signed a 3-year maximum contract with the Dallas Wings, $1 million per year for a power forward. Whether that figure reflects the player's value or the current inflation of WNBA free agency is a separate question. What it demonstrated was that the going rate for the frontcourt talent Indiana was targeting had moved beyond what the organization was prepared to pay. Cox evaluated the numbers, measured them against the team's longer-term financial commitments, and declined to match. Within a short window of that decision being finalized, the Cunningham signing was announced. The framing of that announcement as a fallback position misreads the situation. From the front office's perspective, Cunningham's return was the preferred resolution once the maximum contract frontcourt options were no longer available at a price the organization considered reasonable. She was not a consolation prize. She was the player they had intended to re-sign, assuming the higher priority targets were either acquired or priced out of range. Cunningham's statistical profile supports her value on its own terms. She shot 43% from three-point range last season, a figure that creates spacing problems for opposing defenses regardless of who else is on the floor. But the case for her roster spot extends beyond shooting efficiency. In June of 2025, during a game against the Connecticut Sun, Clark was subject to repeated physical contact throughout the contest. Contact that, in the view of many observers, exceeded normal defensive physicality. Cunningham's response to one particular incident, a flagrant foul that resulted in an ejection, became the defining moment of her value to the franchise. The action was not just a foul, it was a signal to the rest of the league that physical play directed at Clark would carry consequences. That deterrent function does not appear in box scores, but it shapes how opposing teams approach game planning. The Fever's decision-makers viewed that sequence as clarifying evidence of what Cunningham provides that no shooting percentage can fully capture. The contract length, 1 year, reflects a broader financial strategy that the organization has been executing deliberately. The next collective bargaining agreement takes effect in 2027, and it is expected to substantially alter the salary structure across the league. Clark and Boston are both approaching the point in their careers when maximum contract extensions will be required to retain them. If the Fever had committed multiple players to multi-year deals at current salary levels, they would enter those negotiations with less flexibility. The short-term contracts being handed out across the roster are not signs of uncertainty about the players involved. They are a mechanism for preserving cap space heading into a period when the cost of retaining the franchise's 2 central players will be significantly higher. This is not an unusual front office approach. Teams operating with a defined long-term core will frequently accept short-term roster instability in order to maintain financial flexibility around their key assets. The Fever are executing a version of that strategy with more transparency than is typical, simply because the timeline is legible to anyone paying attention to CBA negotiations. The second major development of Indiana's offseason involves a player who has not yet signed, Maisha Hines-Allen, most recently with the Dallas Wings, generated significant speculation after posting an image on social media that appeared to reference the Fever. If Indiana acquires Hines-Allen, the roster's physical profile changes considerably. Cunningham operates primarily on the perimeter. She tracks guards, applies physical pressure on ball handlers, and is willing to initiate contact when players she considers to be targeting Clark approach the paint. Hines-Allen is an interior presence. She pursues rebounds with an aggression that tends to affect how opposing bigs position themselves, and she finishes through contact at a rate that forces defenders into difficult decisions about how much physicality they are willing to absorb. A lineup with both players on the floor would give Indiana a defensive identity that last season's roster did not have. The 2025 Fever were a talented team. There were moments when their offensive capability was undeniable, but in physical matchups against teams built around size and strength, New York, for example, which has continued to add front-court talent, Indiana's ability to compete with durability was questionable. Adding Cunningham was a partial answer to that problem. Adding Hines-Allen would represent a more complete one. The broader context for these moves is a league that is becoming larger and more physical. Expansion has added new rosters. Veterans who might previously have had to earn spots through efficiency are now finding contracts because teams need bodies. More importantly, the franchises that have consistently competed for championships in recent years have shared a common characteristic. They are difficult to play against physically. They contest every drive. They protect the rim. They make scoring feel like work. Indiana has historically not been that team. The Fever's current front office strategy appears to be a direct response to that reality. The guard rotation, independent of the frontcourt moves, is already positioned as one of the deepest in the league. Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, Nalissa Smith, Cunningham, and Katie Lou Samuelson, with additional depth available, gives Indiana the ability to sustain offensive pressure across multiple lineup configurations. Opposing coaches face a compounding problem. Rotating to contain Clark opens space for Cunningham in the corner. Committing two defenders to the perimeter creates driving lanes for the interior. There's no clean answer. Each choice the defense makes has a cost, and Indiana can exploit whichever gap presents itself. This kind of guard depth does not by itself win championships, but it creates a foundation. Teams that go deep in the playoffs need multiple players capable of being the primary offensive option on any given night. They need the ability to adjust when a defensive scheme takes away one scoring avenue. The Fever have that capacity in the backcourt. The question heading into the 2026 season is whether the frontcourt will be constructed to support it. Cunningham, in her public comments following the signing, kept the message brief. She indicated the team was ready to compete at a higher level than it had before. The framing was consistent with a player who understands her role and is comfortable in it, not a featured piece seeking a larger platform, but a complementary player who has accurately assessed what her presence makes possible for the team around her. There is also a practical dimension to returning to Indiana that goes beyond wins and losses. Clark is the highest profile player in the history of women's professional basketball in terms of media attention, commercial interest, and broadcast reach. Playing alongside her in a market that is now one of the most closely watched in the sport creates opportunities for every player on the roster that would not exist in most other situations. Endorsement interest follows visibility. Visibility follows Clark. The players around her benefit from that proximity in ways that do not show up in salary figures. For a player on a one-year contract looking to maximize her profile heading into what may be the most transformative period of WNBA financial history, the decision to return to Indiana is not difficult to understand. The franchise is in transition, not from failure to competence, but from early promise to credible contention. There is a meaningful difference between a talented young team that generates excitement and a mature roster capable of winning in difficult circumstances. The Fever have been the former. The front office is constructing the latter. That process is not complete. The front court remains the variable. If Hines-Allen signs with Indiana, the roster will have a physical identity to match its offensive talent. If she does not, the Fever will need to find a different solution before the season begins. Cox has demonstrated a willingness to explore the market aggressively and a discipline about pricing that suggests the organization is not going to panic into a bad contract simply to fill a positional need. The 2026 season will test whether the construction holds. The talent is present. The depth exists. The financial framework is in place. What remains is execution on the court, in late-season games, against physical opponents, when the offensive output is contested and the margin for error narrows. That is where roster identity matters. The Fever's recent moves suggest they understand what they were missing and have a clear picture of what they are trying to build. The identity being constructed in Indiana is one built on resistance, a team that absorbs pressure, answers physicality with physicality, and does not yield ground without cost. Whether that identity fully materializes will depend on the decisions still ahead, but the direction is legible, and the organizational will to see it through appears to be genuine. Indiana's approach to roster construction this offseason did not happen in a vacuum. Every decision Cox made, the short-term contracts, the willingness to walk away from max-level frontcourt targets, the deliberate prioritization of physical durability alongside offensive talent, was a direct response to observable trends across the rest of the league. Understanding what the Fever are building requires understanding what the rest of the WNBA is building at the same time, and why the two things are in direct conversation with each other. New York has spent the past 2 off-seasons accumulating talent with a consistency that resembles asset collection more than traditional roster management. The franchise has added size, shooting, and defensive versatility in a sequence that suggests a front office operating with a multi-year blueprint rather than reacting to each offseason as a discrete event. The result is a team that presents problems at multiple positions simultaneously. Stopping New York requires a defense capable of switching assignments without creating exploitable mismatches, and doing so across 40 minutes, not just in isolated stretches. Last season, Indiana did not have that capability with consistency. The Fever were competitive in stretches. They were not durable over the course of a full playoff series against a team built to apply sustained pressure. Dallas, meanwhile, has constructed a frontcourt that reflects the same logic the Fever are now trying to counter. The Wings' willingness to commit a 3-year maximum contract to Alana Smith is on one level an overpayment for an individual player. On another level, it is a statement about organizational philosophy. Dallas has decided that interior size and physicality are worth paying a premium for, because the alternative, being undersized against the teams that have already made that investment, is more expensive in terms of postseason outcomes. The Fever read that same market and reached a different conclusion about where the value actually resided. Rather than overpaying for a single frontcourt piece, Indiana has pursued a strategy of accumulating multiple players who each contribute a portion of what a max-level interior player would provide, at a combined cost that leaves room for the franchise's larger financial obligations in 2027. Whether that calculation proves correct will not be known until the Fever are tested in a playoff environment against one of those franchises. But the logic is coherent, and it reflects a level of front office thinking that has not always been associated with Indiana. For much of the franchise's history, the Fever operated reactively, signing available players, filling needs as they became obvious, and rarely demonstrating the kind of forward-looking asset management that championship-level organizations require. The current front office appears to be operating differently. The short-term contracts are not accidents. They are instruments of a deliberate plan. The league-wide implication of Indiana's strategy is that it puts pressure on other franchises to articulate their own version of a long-term plan. Teams that have built around a single star without the surrounding infrastructure to support a deep postseason run are increasingly exposed as the competition at the top of the league intensifies. The Fever's willingness to accept short-term uncertainty, to let fans spend 24 hours in a state of anxious speculation in service of a longer-term objective, is a model that other front offices are watching. Some will replicate it. Others will continue to chase immediate solutions at prices that compromise their future flexibility. The structural shift represented by the 2027 CBA is the underlying force driving most of these decisions. Every general manager in the league is operating with awareness that the salary environment is about to change in ways that are not yet fully quantifiable. The players most likely to command maximum contracts under the new structure are already identifiable. Teams that have those players on their rosters are making decisions now about how to position themselves for negotiations that are still 2 years away. Teams that do not have those players are making decisions about whether to pursue them and at what cost. Indiana is in an unusual position within that landscape. They have two players, Clark and Boston, who will almost certainly command maximum contracts under the new CBA, and who are both young enough that committing to them long-term carries limited risk relative to the upside they represent. That clarity of purpose shapes every other roster decision the organization makes. Players who fit around Clark and Boston on short-term deals are preferable to players who might be slightly better, but whose contracts would create complications when the time comes to lock in the franchise's core. This is the context in which Sophie Cunningham's one-year deal makes complete sense. It is not a stopgap. It is a structurally correct decision for a franchise that knows exactly what it is building and when the most consequential financial decisions will need to be made. Cunningham contributes shooting, physical deterrence, and positional versatility on a contract that does not encumber the organization's future. If she plays well, she earns a better deal elsewhere or in Indiana. If the team's needs evolve, the Fever have the flexibility to respond. Every outcome is manageable. The broader message Indiana's offseason sends to the rest of the league is one about patience and prioritization. Franchises that react to each free agency cycle in isolation, signing the most available talent at whatever the market demands, tend to accumulate commitments that limit their options precisely when flexibility would be most valuable. The Fever are consciously avoiding that pattern. They are accepting the short-term discomfort of incomplete rosters and speculative fan reaction in exchange for a financial position that will allow them to operate decisively when the landscape shifts. That shift is coming. The 2027 CBA will restructure compensation across the league, elevate the floor for top-tier players, and likely accelerate the competitive separation between franchises with genuine long-term cores and those still assembling theirs. Indiana, if the current strategy holds, will enter that period with their two most important players under contract, cap space to complement them, and a roster philosophy already tested across multiple seasons of meaningful competition. The rest of the league is watching. The question now is whether Indiana can execute on what they have constructed and whether the final piece of the front court falls into place before the season begins.